And I find that that can also be a little dangerous in some circumstances, because if you say something that you didn't really want to, shoulda, coulda, woulda said once, they'll say that too. What's up with that? They'll say it. So understanding about how do we do this? We're going to start to peel away the layers. How to find out, how to select the words that we want to teach. Looking at the words that are in the text that you're using is important, whether that text is informational, whether it's from the book, whether it's supplemental, whatever it is. And also really critically looking at what is the concept of the text? What is the concept of the actual written material? And how does it fit into the unit? Because if you don't have a clear understanding of that, how are the students going to have a clear understanding of that? And I think, to be honest with you, in all fairness, most teachers know their material really, really well. So I feel like this part will be really easy. So looking at the cake, tier words, basic words, tier 1, usually taught by a lot of teachers. High frequency words, we call them in early developmental literacy arenas. And when it comes to English learners, or students who may be lacking in some academic language, you would be surprised that they often need help sometimes with tier 1 words. So don't forget about them. They're there. Tier 3, pretty easy to figure out, because most textbooks, most supplementary materials, they already have them highlighted for you or in bold, bold font. The one in the middle, kind of like the middle child, for any of you that are the middle child, this one is a little more tricky. This one is a little more complicated. These are words or patterns of language that often go across content areas. So things that students will need to do, not just in language arts, but in math, science, social studies, music, and all of them. Things like infer, analyze, describe. When you describe something in literature, let's think about Shakespeare. When you describe a passage from Shakespeare, the discourse that is necessary is different than describing the steps in a scientific experiment or describing the results. In both cases, kids are asked to describe. So we have to help them understand that there's a different set of rules, discourse rules, even though describe is the same. Transition words. Really important. Connectors. This is another one. This is not polygamous. Polysemous. Somebody said, polygamous? That's not cool. Let's talk a little bit about what some of those mean. You want me to go back? Did I hear that? We're going to get there. That's a great question. Hold that thought. So let's look at some academic, content-specific, or technical words. I don't think any of these are surprising to you. Okay? We got math, we got science, we got social studies. We could have added a column for literature. Very typical. These, most teachers understand they got to pre-teach this vocabulary. Not a problem. The tier 2 words, information processing like infer, imply, convey, functions. When you combine an idea in language arts or combine sentences, combine phrases, it's a different function than combining chemicals in chemistry or combining numbers in math. Same thing goes with the connectors. And oftentimes, when kids see these out of context, they're not sure with the connectors what to do. So we have to kind of help them translate what that means. Polysemous. Words that sound the same, but have different meanings in different contexts. Remember yesterday I talked about the importance of writing your instructions and saying them? It's kind of along these same lines. So when we're talking about tables in math, it might look like, I don't know, what would a table look like? Like that. Exactly. In fact, if you're a Microsoft Word person and you have ever inserted a table, it's going to ask you how many rows and columns you want. We're talking about it in science. Maybe we're talking about the water table and how important it is and what happens when there's a drought. In social studies, maybe we're talking about the table that was used on Thanksgiving, or the table that Thomas Jefferson built. Colonial styles of architecture, something like that. In language arts, maybe we're talking about a table of contents. The same word, very different meanings. Kind of going back to the fulcrum piece. When you have second language learners in your classroom, and I say when, not if, I want you to remember also the notion of this thing called cognates, meaning a word that is similar in one language and in another. So I'm trying to think of a cognate from English to Spanish. And all I can think of is non-cognates because we spend so much time warning teachers about that. Well, I guess demographics, that's a good example. When we talk, the word for demographics in Spanish sounds almost exactly like the word demographic in English. Demografía. So we're thinking that a Spanish speaker really needs to start here because this is the simple word. When in all reality, if we started here, that might ring a bell because they know this word in Spanish. Tell me. Abdominal. Abnormal. Same spelling, different pronunciation. Yeah. Abolición. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Some of the non-cognates that you have to watch. No and no. Excelente. Yes. Some of the non-cognates, my favorite one, not to pick on the pregnant people or the formerly pregnant people in the room, but the word for pregnant in Spanish is embarazada, which sounds very similar to embarrass. So sometimes people will mix that one up, like, I'm embarrassed, and instead they're saying, I'm pregnant. Whoops, wrong one. So think of hambre, hombre, they're like similar, hunger and man. You have to like really, if you're, going to go there, you got to watch. But my point in telling you all of this is that it's okay in many cases to start with the hard stuff. If they need scaffolding, say demographics and in parentheses put people. Give them exposure to both. And eventually they'll stop looking at the people piece if they need it. And they'll just use the tier 3 words. My stepson, I think I told you guys, he's a native speaker of French. And he's at the doctor when he first came here at the pediatrician and talked about his patella. And I'm like, he's not a genius. I know this. He's a normal kid. Like, he's intelligent, but he's not, like, strangely intelligent, Albert Einstein-ish. So I asked him I didn't say a word in front of the pediatrician, but on the way out, I had to like play charades because his language at that point wasn't that, his English language wasn't that proficient. So I'm like, how did you know patella? And he says it in French. It's the same word. So he could say that in English. And he like blew me out of the water. Once again, Joan God showed up. I was embarrassed. Teachers often forget the tier 2 words. I can't stress this enough. We made a big mistake in the field of teaching English as a second language, and we actually at one point very recently, like within the last couple of years, told teachers not to use idioms. Like, avoid them, it's too hard for the kids, they can't handle it, just say it normally. Wrong answer. Not only should you use idioms, you should use them a lot. Just translate them. I don't mean word for word like English to Spanish or English to Vietnamese. I mean like explain what it means. Because students have to use idioms and idiomatic expressions now more than ever with Common Core. And they have to use them in all content areas. They existed before. But this whole new focus on language has made a difference. Phrasal clusters. A lot of times students have a difficult time understanding when a word is put with another word that it changes the meaning. So can anybody think of an example of a phrasal cluster or one that you might want to, yes. Even though is one, and I know that's not really a phrase, but like if you look at the word even in isolation, and you look at the word though in isolation, depending on the context of the use of the word, when you put them together, like especially in math, if they know something is even, it's equal. And then even though, like, I don't really understand this. So think about words that sometimes get combined where meanings are then changed. Homophones, this was an example we talked about yesterday, where words sound the same, but they're spelled differently. Got to have lots of experience with speaking, lots of time to practice like we talked about yesterday, making sure that all teachers, not just language arts teachers, are really explicitly teaching reading comprehension in all content areas. I cannot stress that enough. I think we can pretty much understand what happens when there's limited word recognition and limited vocabulary, that this really is hard on comprehension and overall student outcomes. The other thing with language learners, even if they're native speakers of English, because their home language may be structured differently than academic language. And we want to make sure that we think about, well, how is this language that I'm using in school different? Maybe there's a different word order. Maybe there are obviously more complexities, including complex nouns, complex noun phrases, things like that. So just be mindful of these. As we move into writing and we get close to our activity, I believe that you understand the importance of writing. I think that even people outside of the context of schooling, people in society in general, are really beginning to understand how important writing is and what happens when people in any career path have problems with writing. So the Carnegie Corporation released a statement that we love to talk about, that writing is not just an option. It's not creative writing. It's not keeping a journal. It's not storytelling in terms of, well, I'm going to write this down and it's going to be kind of frou-frou-y. This is about being able to write in different ways. Along with reading comprehension, writing skills, that should say are, a predictor of academic success and a basic requirement for participation in civic life in a global community. Really, really important. It's one of my favorite cartoons. How we invented writer's block. Had to lighten the air a little bit. Half of the private employers and more than 60% of state government employees say writing skills impact promotional decisions. Oh my gosh. Poorly written applications are likely to doom candidates' chances for employment. I would have to agree with that. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a position where you had to look at an application or someone's resume, and if the writing isn't good, what's the first thing you say? No way. Next. Exactly. Look at this. And these statistics are now 10 years old. $3.5 billion for writing remediation. Professional development for people to learn how to write in their jobs. We got to figure it out. I can tell you in higher ed, when the freshman class comes in, every year we're like, when the freshmen, even sometimes sophomores and juniors, are turning in papers, and their writing skills are hard. It's hard. They need help. The Writing Center at UNC Charlotte is always being used, which is a good thing. Writing is how students connect the dots in their knowledge. So we write differently in different subject areas, but it helps the brain make those cognitive connections. Enhances critical thinking, allows students to take greater responsibility for their own learning. These are all commercial ads for why do we need to help kids write. It makes Joan really happy because her grading is so much, it goes really well when she's grading papers. I did not add that. Promotes reflective thinking and questioning, helps the students make connections, really helps them apply what they know in different settings, all connected to writing. So as we move into the science thinking and the math thinking, writing a lab project for biology requires a different set of writing skills than writing a poem in English. It's up to us as teachers to really model those differences, but also to call students' attention to. If you're teaching science or you're teaching math and you're asking students to write, it's okay to say, okay, how is this writing different than what you guys just did in language arts? How is this writing different than what you're doing in music class? That is a whole language of its own when you write in music. And getting students to understand the difference between revisions and editing. Revising, polishing their ideas, changing the focus of the tone, and then the editing with all of the cosmetics, the punctuation, things like that.